Do you tend to think there's way more fear going on than needs to be as far as, what the shutdown can do, what it will mean for people?
Well, I think there is fear, and I think it's being hyped up by the media and by the rhetoric that goes on in Washington, which, is all focused around disaster and catastrophe and all the rest of this sort of stuff.
The clock that's now counting up for how long it's been rather than how long it was going to be?
Those kinds of things. And look, I don't want to minimize anybody not getting paid or whatever. I mean, those people are suffering, and I feel sorry for them. I feel sorry for these families of these 5 soldiers who were killed in Afghanistan last weekend, and they didn't get their $100,000 check, which is what the government does for them. However, I understand a civilian organization has now stepped up and is writing the checks. So it happens. I think there's 2 real fears that are really concerning. I think some people are concerned that if they shut the government down, the populace will figure out that they don't need it. And the other people are afraid that that they won't get reelected because the people who vote for them won't have any money. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the great fear of what's going on right now. I mean, look, most people aren't living their lives right now worried about whether or not the government's going to shut down tomorrow.
No, it's almost a running joke at this point in time.
Most people in the country are not political. What they are interested in is their lives, is their job, is their kids going to college, is their financial plans. Yes, they vote. Yes, they're citizens, but they're not activists politically. And so this doesn't really affect them. They're too busy earning a living.
A while back, and we've talked about this a lot on our show, we've discussed the amount of information that comes in. And it seems like people are starting to, at least in my opinion, pull back from all the information. And as you say, the people are starting to shrink their community because, you can't fathom the amount of what these problems are. You can't solve them. And I think people are starting to shrink their communities outside of social media, I suppose. But it doesn't seem like everybody is as worried with the world's and their problems as much as they are their own and their families and maybe their neighbors.
I just think you can't comprehend it and you can't really understand it. These problems are very complex. And, of course, you know that all the information everybody's getting is 100% correct, right? I mean,
absolutely.
It's the old story. You can't put anything on the internet that's not true.
There's only 2,000 TV stations, and I'm sure everything is being vetted.
Everything they say on those things is 100% accurate. So a lot of people have just come to the point where what's been said, it doesn't have any credibility with them anymore, so they're just ignoring it. And again, they're going back to what they really have to be concerned about, which is themselves and their family overall.
So when you start talking to people in the financial industry about what goes on during this type of political crisis, I suppose we can call it, what are some of the things that you're telling your clients now? Well,
first of all, I'm trying to get them to understand that language right now is being used pretty sloppily. For example, the word default. Default is defined as not being able to meet your financial obligations. So let's talk about that in terms of the federal government. Federal government borrows money to pay bills and do various stuff, and there's a limit to how much money the federal government can borrow. It's called the debt ceiling. That's coming up for renewal on October 17th. Now, there is enough money, according to the Treasury accounts, there is enough money coming in from taxes and stuff like that to pay the interest on the existing debt. So when the debt ceiling comes, that doesn't mean that we're going to default on every single bond of the $16 trillion we have borrowed. What it does mean is that, and it doesn't mean the government can't refinance existing debt, they just can't borrow anymore. So they can roll over debt, but they can't exceed that certain limit. What that means then is that the spending that has to get cut is what we call the deficit. It's the amount we spend over what we take in. Now, that's substantial. That's like probably $400 or $500 billion a year that would instantly have to come out of the economy. And that would be, I mean, the recession that would cause is unfathomable. The second thing is, and this is something that people forget. The United States dollar and the United States Treasury bonds and our issues are the world standard of trade. Everything is done in dollars. There is no way the rest of the world can switch to another standard fast enough to offset the fact that if the United States were to totally default on debt. It just can't happen. Also, default is called on the debtor, the borrower, by the lender. So you got to think about this. Are the Chinese and the Japanese and everybody else going to call a default on the United States and destroy their own trade? There are companies out there that don't pay their debt and they don't go into default because the owners of the bonds just get together and say, look, I think there's a solution here. Let's not take this into default, which engenders all kinds of legal stuff. So, you know, I'm not saying go along here and think that nothing's going to happen, but the consequences of this are almost, they're unfathomable. Mm-hmm. And you got to think, we got to hope at least that somewhere along the line, some adult is going to stand up in our national leadership and say, okay, enough is enough. There's a bigger issue here. And, you know, come on, guys, I'm going to put you in a room. We're going to beat your head together until we get an answer on this.
I mean, this is like the death spiral stuff, right?
Yeah.
Where all of a sudden, as you say, now you've almost shut down world trade.
Right.
Because the dollar is no longer as strong as it once was.
Yeah,
and that
you
is
can't
the
get a
world
license.
currency.
Yeah, and you can't get a license now to export stuff and import stuff, so therefore you can't do it, and that has a ripple effect back through the economy. So, it could just get very serious. Yes, it could. It could be disastrous, and it would make. Well, my big concern is that we're going to make a mistake like they made with Lehman Brothers in 2008. They let Lehman Brothers go bankrupt. They didn't fully understand the consequences of what was going to happen, and it caused this huge contraction in the financial markets, which made it bad. And my fear is that these people are digging their heels in, and they're trying to make ideological points, and they're going to hold this thing a little bit too long, and there's going to be a mistake, and something's going to happen, and we are going to default on one or two issues of bonds, or we're going to do something, and the world's going to suddenly, contract like a dried up orange.
You talk about making the mistake. My other concern is a lot of these people, they're not economists. They're lifelong politicians.
Yeah.
And so I always wonder who's actually making the decisions, and for what reason? Is there really a true understanding of what can go on in the economy? Is that what they're studying right now, or are they studying politics and how to position themselves?
It's both.
Correctly.
Look, there is so much blame to go around here. The economists, they make lousy forecasts. The politicians are concerned about getting reelected. I mean, the prime directive for a politician is to get reelected.
It's called keeping your job.
It's called keeping your job. And there are people out there who I think are generally standing on principle. They generally believe that the government needs to be cut back in size. There are people out there who believe the government needs to be expanded. Okay, fine. I respect principle. But there's a bigger issue. The bigger issue that is that if you stand on principle, and 25 years from now, we're all living in a farm and trading, living in homespun clothing, and our cars are all done because somebody screwed up. Have you really made your point? And what you've got here are a bunch of schoolyard bullies, and they've got themselves in a confrontation. Nobody wants to back down because it might make them look bad. And
nobody wants to go back into the classroom after recess is over.
Congress has got a 5% approval rating right now. I mean, please. I mean, that means basically that their blood relatives and those on their staffs are voting for them. That's about all.
It's pretty incredible. Yet they'll still have somehow a 90%
they'll all get reelected.
reelection rate.
And where you want to put the blame, that's the blame on us.
Yeah.
We keep reelecting these people.